I've been in that situation before, perhaps you have as well. And so that's what started him on a journey to really understand and become good at apologetics, basically defending the faith. And as he continued on in 2018, he even started an apologetics podcast named Next Generation Saints, which is still running. And he's been able to get onto the ASU campus and interact just with students, which really takes not only a lot of wisdom, but a lot of courage, because they are coming from all over the place, as you know. And then in 2023, he got on with Stan Therese, and then he's the director of the North Phoenix Outpost. So right now he's studying at the Calvin School of Theology in Apologetics, and that's in La Mirada, California. So will you give a warm welcome to him?
Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. Yes, I've been doing apologetics for a long time. Lisa reached out to me earlier 2024-ish. And basically, what I understand is a lot of people reaching out to elders trying to be able to understand the Christian faith and reach out to family and friends, excuse me, in order to share the gospel. So I have I have some experience in that particular area about how to reach out to people and understand exactly how do you have this conversation with people, how do you interact with them, and how do you do it in a way, because most people, like when I first started with Christian Apologetics, my heart was racing. I was trying to shoot. I felt like I was a cowboy in the West, you know, those Westerners where they pull out the gun and start shooting from the hip. Until I got more wisdom from studying places like over by Iowa, they taught a lot about Christian politics, how to talk to people. I watched Give Me an Answer with Cliff and Stuart Connectley. I'd also do Stand to Reason, and I learned that you don't fire from the hip. You want to ask probing questions. So today, we're going to go over some of those things. So this is sharing one's faith, how to do it. The first thing you need to know is what season are these people in. Think of it like you're out in a field and you're growing crops. When you're out there, it's not necessarily the right season for picking. Sometimes you're planting seed and you're watering it and you're tending the garden. But other times, other people will come over and it'll be perfect time to pick the fruit. But sometimes when you pick the fruit, it's not quite ready yet. You gotta let it ripen a little bit. So you need to know the season. So who are you talking to? What is their relationship with this particular person? Ask yourself the question: are you the sower? Are you the person going out there and planting the seed and tending the garden? Or are you the harvester? We all see it, like we turn on Harvest Crusade over in Angel Stadium. You see thousands of people come onto the field professing Christ, which is great. But that's also when they're picking the harvest when it's ripe and ready to go. You don't see the background where people are asking questions or trying to teach about Jesus Christ, the person, and all the hostility and all the junk that comes with it. Now, here's a big one I always put down. This is one that I see a lot of Christians have a hard time with. Don't beat yourself up if you're rejected. I can't tell you how many times I've been out to ASU and people have said things like, "You're stupid, you're full of junk." I say nicely here. You don't know what you're talking about. You're brainwashed. I'm rejected left, right, and center. They flipped me off over there. I had Palestinian protesters came across. We just asked questions to. The hostility, because they knew I'm wearing a cross around my neck. Whereas I'm over there with Rashi and Christy, and they know who we represent in the hostility. So don't be put down when you get rejected. So really fast, to give a little bit more illustration over the harvest, let's go to the first video.
I had somewhat of an epiphany 10, 15 years ago. Something came together for me that has really profoundly influenced the way that I approach the whole task that we generally call evangelism. Before there can be a harvest, there has to be a season of gardening. And what this points out for evangelism is that before someone comes to Christ, there is a season of that person considering Christ. And nowadays, that season is a whole lot longer than it used to be. In other words, as Francis Schaeffer used to put it, we need more pre-evangelism than we ever needed. So if we just go out into the field and we are looking for a harvest, and our evangelism technique is focusing on getting people to sign on the dotted line to close the deal, so to speak, we may be really frustrated because it's like harvesting fruit that's not ripe yet. And I began to think of my own life, and I realized that I'm not really a harvester. I'm a gardener. Everything that I do, really, on the radio and writing books and talking to audiences, is mostly gardening, not harvesting. Is there a harvest? Sure. I get people that come to me, and they tell me that they listened to the show or read the books, and eventually they became a Christian. Right? In other words, somebody went into my garden, where I've been gardening, and harvested my fruit. Do you think that bothers me? No, it doesn't bother me. I'm glad for that. And Jesus said the same thing in John chapter 4, right after the woman at the well. The disciples came up to him after she had gone up to Sychar, and he says to the disciples, you are about to reap where you did not sow. In other words, he's identifying one field, two seasons, reaping and sowing, and two kinds of workers, reapers and sowers, harvesters and gardeners. And I think the gardening job is the one that's the hardest to do, because when the fruit is ripe, it falls into the basket. What Jesus is telling the disciples is they're about to get the ripe, low-hanging fruit, though someone else did the heavy lifting. And then he says, so that the one who reaps and the one who sows can rejoice together. That's my approach. That's what I mean when I say I just want to put a stone in somebody's shoe. When I go to engage other people, I'm not looking to lead them to Christ. I'm not looking to close the deal. I'm not swinging for the fences. I'm just trying to make a small difference in their life. Put a stone in their shoe, get them thinking about something important about Christ. Maybe create a doubt in their mind about their own view, so that would move them a little bit closer. And I think if more Christians thought of themselves as gardeners and not worried about the harvest, which I think is going to take care of itself by God's sovereignty, we get out there and start gardening, doing a little here, a little there, more Christians will get off the bench and get in and play. And this is part of the reason I have the tactical game plan, because tactics is a game plan that will allow you to do that effectively. Tactics helps you to learn. And gardening, I think, is the biggest thing that's needed right now.
Okay, so we need to have tactics. Now, I like to think of usually when I hear a lot of Christians say, I want to go out there and convert people to Christ, I agree with them. I don't go out to ASU campus or talk to people in order to convert them to Christianity or to Jesus Christ. My very first approach is to figure out where they are in their seasons. So I need to know, like when I go to ASU and I'm talking to students, I need to know, first of all, how are they raised? You know, were they raised? Are they Christian currently? Were they a Christian before and then fell away from the faith? Were they never a Christian to begin with? Are they hostile to Christianity? I need to know these things in order to approach it correctly. What do they currently believe in right now? And trust me, you'll hear the craziest stuff out there. I'm not kidding you. But before we go into that, and then what are past struggles? I've come across people who are extremely hostile to Christianity, where I have to actually agree with them a lot. They'll talk about their father or mother were in ministry and they were preaching about not having affairs, but they were having an affair with another person in their life. Or they would be hypocrites at all times. Or the priest touched them in a particular way that we hear on the news. These things cause damages. And it would become, instead, and this is where I would put a little side note, I would categorize them not as atheists, because they usually will say, I'm an atheist. I'd say, no, atheists, I met before, they just don't believe God exists. You're not really hostile to it, but they just don't believe it. They're very hostile. In fact, if you ever watched the movie God's Not Dead from Pureflix, Professor Addison in the film, he goes, I hate God. Whoa. How do you hate something that doesn't exist? The answer is because you know he exists. You're an anti-theist. You don't want God to exist. And I've come across plenty of that before. So you need to understand how they're raised, what they currently believe, and the current struggles of their past or what they're going through as well. That's how you get a base understanding of where they're coming from. That's where we're going to be diving into the Columbo questions, be able to do it. But we're probably going to go through this next video really fast, basically share how we go do these.
I talk a lot about having a tactical game plan in place that will allow you to go forward and engage somebody in a productive way for Christ without taking a lot of risk on yourself. I've talked in the past about the importance of not worrying about the harvest, but thinking more about the gardening, because if we garden effectively, then the harvest will take care of itself. Plus, the idea of trying to win someone to Christ and get them to sign on the dotted line is a little daunting for a lot of people, so they sit on the bench instead of getting out into the field. And so I want to suggest a means by which you can do that. Okay, what's the first step of the game plan? The first step of the game plan is to simply gather information. You cannot know how to proceed effectively in a conversation unless you have basic information. Now, what does that do? It gives me a little bit of a sense of the lay of the land. I might find out whether or not they're a Christian, or if they used to be a Christian and aren't now, or whether they've ever thought about Christianity, or whether they're hostile to Christianity. You see, these are all things that are really valuable to know before you move forward. This is one step that you don't need to hurry. Do not worry about getting to the end game, leading them to Christ. Don't even think about that now. Just think about gathering information. Now, I have a model question at this point that will help you. And the model question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? It's a model question. That means you can use it in different ways, under different circumstances with different people. Now, this is especially helpful when people are raising objections against Christianity or offering challenges. And just, there are all kinds of challenges that require more information. And so when somebody says, well, everything's relative, and you ask, what do you mean by relative? Or they say, I believe in evolution, and you ask, what do you mean by evolution? Or they say, well, I believe the Bible is filled with errors, or the Bible has been changed, or that Jesus never lived, or that he lived but he wasn't a miracle worker, etc., etc., etc. It is always in your favor to ask more questions. You don't have to answer that objection. Not at this point. All you have to do is get more information. And the more information you get, the better. The more you understand that person, the more you understand that person's ideas, the more clarity you have of the challenge, the better you'll be able to decide in the future which direction to go, or if you don't go in any direction at all. This first question, what do you mean by that, meant to help you gather information, is going to get you started. And that's all we want to worry about at this point in the tactical game.
I stand to reason we help Christians have the courage and the grace to share their worldview with others.
Okay, so yes, tactical questions. What do you mean by that? That's a big one. A lot of people come out, and I've seen good examples of this and bad examples. I remember watching Bill Nye the Science Guy. You probably all heard of him, right? When he went to the Ark, I forget what state it is, if anyone knows, that's fine. Kentucky. Okay. He went to the Ark, and I will never forget this. He's walking on the boat, and he's talking to one of the guys who does the ministry and helped build the Ark. And this one guy comes out of nowhere, and everyone knows that Bill Nye's an atheist, right? You all know that. He's also genderly confused. That's okay, I guess. We're not all perfect. So this person comes out and says, "Excuse me, sir, do you believe in God?" Rhetorical question. In fact, I was with Bill Nye on this one, when he goes, "I'm not even going to answer your question because you sound like an idiot." That is correct. What we should be doing is a Columbo question. So if he comes forward and says, scientifically, we've proven evolution is correct. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by evolution? Are we talking speciation? Are we talking change of kinds? What evidence, what do you mean by all this? These are good questions for probing. I've come across people like Or say, what do you mean by that? That's a really good one I've used all the time. The Bible is chock full of errors and contradictions. Oh, okay, cool. Well, what do you mean by that? What's a contradiction? Could you explain that to me? The Bible is so able to interpret it different ways. Okay, cool. What do you mean? Like, what do you mean by interpretation? Can you define that? Because a lot of the time, we're using words out there with each other. Like, if I were to talk to a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, like, let's say Mormonism, and we come up, we have a great conversation. We're saying, Jesus Christ, Heavenly Father, salvation. But then we break it down and say, okay, well, who is God to you? Can you describe him? Oh, yes. God was once a man, the Mormon says, that through good teachings of Mormonism became a God. Oh, wait a second, that's not what we're saying here. We're trying to get definitions. So you want to get definitions of what the person is talking about. Ultimately, I'd also turn around and say, how did you come to that conclusion? When they say the Bible is full of contradictions, how did you come to that conclusion? When I was at ASU a few weeks back, there was a gal who came up and she basically said exactly that statement to me. The Bible has contradictions everywhere in it. Loads of them. I go, okay, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? She's like, well, I read it and there's loads of contradictions all over the place. So I said, okay, cool. So instead of me trying to defend that position, I said, okay, so there's so many contradictions, can you point one out to me and explain it in context? I don't want to take the heat on myself, so I put it on them. And I could tell this person had no idea what they were talking about. How? Oh, it's stupid. I can't be here. I got to go to class, and I don't have time. I don't have it on me. You know, they got every excuse till next Sunday about why they can't give you an explanation. So they're making just bold statements with nothing to back it up. I also asked, can you explain that to me? You know, Jesus Christ never claimed to be God. Or Jesus, a Muslim will even say that. Can you explain that to me? How'd you come to that conclusion? How can you trust the Quran? Can you give me some examples of how you can trust the Quran over Jesus? Here's a big one. This is one I learned from Dr. Frank Turk, and I think it's a very important one in the conversation as well. If you have people who are more open to the Christian faith or having issues, and you want to decipher between whether or not they're having an emotional issue towards it, like something bad happened to them and they got abused in some kind of way, or they're an intellect, ask this before I point out. If Christianity were true, would you be a Christian? Because I could take that and rephrase it and go, okay, if gravity was true, would you believe in gravity? Well, of course they would believe in gravity if it was true. So if I show them evidence that gravity is real, like dropping something on the ground, pretty simple, they can believe that. So if Christianity were true, would you be a Christian? If their answer is yes, absolutely, it's an intellectual issue, most likely. But if they say no, absolutely not, it's an emotional issue. And you will hear some of the craziest answers coming out of this. I've had atheists at ASU who said that they can't, when I break down another tactic that I'll bring up for another class, I brought up to them, they finally admitted that they can't understand truth or reality at all. They can't understand it. They can't perceive reality. How their mind, what was it? There was a couple students saying that they believed that their brain was in a vat, scientific vat, somewhere in another dimension being probed with little needles. And they could not perceive reality. So I kindly and lovingly, but directly told them, perhaps you should see a psychologist. If you really believe those things, maybe, because you can't be living life and walk out into traffic or do your daily life thinking that your brain's in the vat and that cars aren't real or any of those things. So these are some of the big tactical questions. I like them because what they do is to take the pressure off of you. Instead of you having to fire off your head, you're asking them to defend their position and understand their position. And I ultimately told several students that you're arguing absurdities. Like when they say, I think there was one we have coming up about answers that they usually have. So if we go to the next last video I believe that we have here, this is going to be the stress-free evangelism that I was explaining, a little bit more clarity, just in case I wasn't able to be clear enough. Go for it.
When we think about a tactical game plan, in other words, how we go about engaging someone in a thoughtful, careful way that allows us to stay relaxed and keeps us from getting in trouble. In other words, keeps the risk level low. What I have in mind is a multiple step process. The first step is to gather information, and we can use some form of question, what do you mean by that? The second step is what I call reversing the burden of proof. Now, the burden of proof is the responsibility someone in the conversation has to give reasons or evidence for a view. Now, there's a rule here that is applied to the burden of proof, and the rule is the one who makes the claim bears the burden. If somebody says the Bible's been changed, or God doesn't exist, or Jesus didn't exist, or there are no miracles, it's not your job as a follower of Christ to jump in and show where the other person is wrong. It is rather that person's job first to show why he or she is right. After we ask some questions to get more clarification, what do you mean by that? Now we have a clear picture of what they believe. Now we want to know why they believe it. This is where some form of the question, how did you come to that conclusion, comes in. What are your reasons for saying that? How do you know that's the way it really happened? Do you have any evidence for that view? I'm interested in finding out. Notice with this second step of the game plan, we are in a sense doing the same thing as the first step. We are gathering information, but we're gathering a different kind of information. First, we get clarity on their point of view. Now we want clarity on why they believe what they believe. Notice that in this stage of the game plan, just like the first step, there's no pressure on you. It's relaxed. You're being a student. You're just listening to what the other person has to say. But the other person has to make clear not only their own view, but also the reasons for their view. And that's why you shouldn't be surprised when you get silence when you ask the question, because most people have not thought through their views. What I want to encourage you with, though, is that you have no obligation to go any further, nor need you do that. You don't have to get into theology or apologetics or philosophy or anything. All you're doing in the game plan with these first two stages is you're still gathering information, you're getting an education, and you're in your mind deciding whether you're in a position to go to step 3, no stress on you. That's one of the values of the tactical game plan.
As stand to reason, we help Christians have the courage and the grace to share their worldview with others.
So yes, we have that. Now, I have come across many times in this, the professor here teaches, is we usually always try to put the burden of proof on them. And I've had many times where students and even professors have come out and said, God doesn't exist. I go, well, how do you come to that conclusion? They go, well, prove to me God exists, right? They'll try to flip it on me. I always try to go with well, we haven't gotten to my worldview yet. I want to understand why you think God does not exist. Can you please explain this to me? And I believe the reason they're so hostile is because they really come to an emotional conclusion without much or very little thought at all to this issue. So that's why when we have that question that's brought up, you really want to put the burden of proof onto them. It's their job to answer the question, why do you believe it? And that's also, like I said, you come to some crazy ones. So these are the two worldviews that I mostly come across over at ASU on the campus. We usually have a Judeo-Christian worldview, which is that God exists, Jesus is God, everyone is born with intrinsic value. Now, does anyone understand intrinsic value and innate worth, what that means? Because I know I didn't originally. Guys, can say yes or no? Yes. Okay, awesome. For anyone who doesn't understand, intrinsic value and innate worth means that you're born with this value, regardless of where you stand in society, whether you're born black, white, purple, green, whatever, male, female, whatever it may be, you have value because you're created in the image of God. And Christians also believe that truth is objective, that when you make a truth statement, it demands exclusivity. So if I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, it means that if someone says 2 plus 2 equals 3 or 5, they're completely wrong. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Truth is objective. Now, morality here is based on God's character. a lot of atheists have this misperception to think that God arbitrarily in his mind just makes up rules and regulations. Now, in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, God does create legislation for Israel in order to transform Israel into a holy people, that is unique. So we do have something of that, but it's not the Ten Commandments, which is God's moral law that is not able to be broken. I always say that the Ten Commandments are written in stone for a reason, guys, because it's in stone, it's 100%. But what he does in order to sanctify us is make rules and regulations in order to transform us into more holy people. So I always point that out. Now, the supernatural in Christianity does exist, as we all know, because I've had some Judeo-Christian Christians who come to where we're doing our tabling, as we call it, and they'll even say, well, we don't believe the supernatural truly exists at all. I go, so let me get this straight. I said, do you believe that Moses, when he led the children of Israel out of Egypt, that he parted the Red Sea? Like, oh yeah, we do. Oh wow, okay. I said, when Christmas comes around and you hear about how did Mary find out that she was going to get pregnant with Jesus? Oh, an angel appeared. Oh, a non-corporeal being comes along that comes from a different dimension shows up. Okay. I go, how did Elijah, did he ever die or did he get sucked up into heaven? They go, oh, no, I think he went up to heaven. I go, oh, by an angel pulling him up. Okay. So you believe these angels exist, but you said there's also something that's supernatural. I said the angels are supernatural in their very nature. Now, the secular worldview, when I go across, is God does not exist. Everything is just matter and energy and chemical reactions. Now, the biggest issue I have over here, I don't have an issue with the matter and energy part because that is true. We are comprising the universe that is comprised of matter, energy, different types of matter, but that's how it is. But the problem I have is the chemical reactions. Many atheists will come forward and say that we are simply complex biochemical reactions and whatnot, and that there's only science, right? All matter and energy, that's all there is to this universe. So I said to him, let's look at something that goes beyond matter and energy. Let's look at things like love, hatred, envy, lust. Could you go ahead and pour out a gallon of love for me? Like an actual gallon of love for me. How about lust? Could you go ahead and measure out 2 feet of that for me? I could use that. Maybe make it into a 2x4? That'd be great. Fantastic for me. Envy or corruption. Could you let's go ahead and weigh out 2 pounds of it for me? These are metaphysical things. Metaphysical is just a fancy word for saying it's beyond. This is not part of the physical realm, but we all know it's real. So I point out those things. Now, I've had atheists who will say that the biochemical reactions in your brain are how you know love. It's just a chemical in your brain. So I push it on to them. I go, okay, that's fine. You can believe that. So here's my question. What chemical from the periodic table of elements or a mixture of chemicals from the periodic table of elements make up love? If you're so convinced that's what it is, please, I'm willing to hear. I'm willing to see what it is. And of course, they come out about as dry as the Sahara Desert when it comes down to an answer like that. Now, going to human value, I've had this one brought up because atheists will always bring up God committed genocide against the Canaanites in the Bible. Instead of trying to defend God's position on the Canaanites, I go, okay, cool. You're acting like humans have value, right? Those people who are Canaanites were humans. You're acting like what happened to them was detrimental. Where do we get any idea of human value? Where does it come from for you? They go, well, it becomes more of a moral issue, but it's kind of interconnected with each other. It's based on democracy. Who do we vote? I go, okay, well, I said, here's the problem I have with democracy. 1930s, Nazi Germany decided that the Jews were not even human anymore. They're less than swine. Let's get them into rail cars, take them over to Auschwitz, gas them, and shoot them in the back of the head. Let's look over the civil rights issue when we had that black people in the South were considered to be 1/3 of a human's dignity. And they voted for this, by the way. It was a democracy. They voted for these things. They voted that you consider dogs and white black people just because they're black. Well, they say that would be corruption. I mean, why would you want to focus on democracy? Humankind has done a great job of destroying it. They said, well, evolution. Evolution is why humans have value. Well, Darwinian evolution, when I read about the origins of species, Darwin doesn't really talk about morality. In fact, the entire morality, if you were to pull anything from there, would simply say the survival of the fittest. What if I went to my neighbor and I saw that he had more money than I did, took a gun, shot him in the head, blew his brains out, and take his money away? Technically, it would help my family out. We get out of a lot of debt, we get out of a lot of problems financially. I'd probably buy a better house, depending on what that was. So right there, wait a second, evolution. I'm just doing what evolution tells me to do. Or, how about telling the rapist? The rapist who's going out there and spreading their seed on unwilling women by raping them. Well, that's what evolution does. Is all sorts of animals go around. They don't ask for consent when they do it. They can just walk up and rape each other and spread their seed. Technically, the seed's continuing on. Therefore, your genetics, your superior genetics are continuing on. Or, my personal favorite, based on your perspective. So, when I had this conversation with an atheist, they said it was about your perspective. I said, okay, what do you mean by it's your perspective? Their answer was, well, what makes you feel good, right? If you feel good, it's good. So I said, okay, imagine if I'm on ASU, and I always like to take the extreme examples because then there's really a gray room in which to argue. I said, imagine we're on ASU campus and you see a woman with a gun to her head, and she used to be her clothes being torn off, and she's about to get raped by a rapist. Okay? She's terrified. It's going to scar her for life. But that rapist is dopamines are flying like crazy. He's killing fantastic. Well, who's right? Who's right in the circumstances? Who's evil? How do you determine that value? If it's all about your perspective or about culture, that's another one they brought up. Depends on your culture. Well, is it Nazi culture? Is it Western society here in America? What about South African? What about in Afghanistan? What about China with the Uyghur population? We all have different opinions about value of human life, do we not? So I bring those up to all these. And they also believe that supernatural doesn't exist. So I bring up and say, okay, they say, well, then how does a Christian determine the moral structure here about how truth, value of a human being, and how morality is determined? Well, I said, let's go through. How do we know about human value? Well, again, as we pointed out right here, we're all born with intrinsic value and innate worth. We are all created in the image of God. Every human being, regardless of the developmental stage, whether it be a fetus to an older person born in the elderly years, or someone who's mentally handicapped or whatever it may be, we're all created in the image of God, born with intrinsic value and innate worth. So me finding a reason to slaughter people is wrong. Why? Because if I took that person's life, I'm telling God, you know, God, when you made this person, bad job, bad for you. I smack him in the face. Then they say, okay, what about truth? How do you know what truth is? Well, a couple of things I look at. Jesus came out in the Bible and said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. In order to understand truth, you first have to understand who God is. Proverbs even points that out. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord, to understand who God is. Because then we can have objective reasoning that we can talk to. Because without God, I would even argue with them that without God, we have no ability to reason, we have no ability to be humane to each other, we have no standard in which to use, other than ourselves, which can be easily corrupted. Now, they also say truth is relative or unknowable. I kind of laughed a little bit about this when I had a bunch of students there, and they chuckled too. Well, truth is not relative. Truth is something in life that demands exclusivity, as I said, 2 + 2 = 4. Truth is something that is, regardless of your personal opinion towards it, does not change. Like, here's one. The President of the United States is Donald Trump. You could say that you wish it was Kamala Harris, but the objective reality is the President of the United States is Donald Trump. That's the simple reality of it. They also say that truth is unknowable. I find this ironic with the students when I bring this up and say, then if you say the truth is unknowable, then why are you at ASU spending huge amounts of money in order to get a college diploma and sit in front of a professor? Or they say that they don't have a standard of knowing what truth is. I remember bringing this part up to several of the students, and I said, when they brought about proof, I said, proof presupposes about truth, reasoning, and logic. And I said, so in order to understand truth, we have to be able to match our minds and our perceptions with reality. I made the example, I'm going to go off on this one. So thank you for following me on this one. I said, imagine this table right here. It's made of glass. I say it's made of glass, right? Y'all looking at this table right here. Is it made of glass? No. But my perception is that. So I ask them all the time, well, how do you are able to change what standard do you use to determine whether this is made out of glass or wood? How do you do that? How do you align yourself? And that's what they say, well, it's all relative. We all know it's not true. That's why in the Bible it says don't argue with the fool half the time. That's why I really like these classes. You're not arguing with the fool you're bringing up. It's a foolish argument that they're making. So let's see here. These are the two different worldviews here. Now, let's see here. I was thinking about maybe going over, you guys have this little piece of paper next to you guys, has a bunch of different statements on it. So I wanted to go through really fast and see if you guys would like to try this out again. I'll ask the question point to you and see how to play devil's advocate on this end. And you guys take what you've learned today and some of the Columbo questions. Again, if you don't get it right the first time, it's okay. That's what we're in the classroom. And you guys can try it in the most non-hostile way. So, is there anyone who wants to try to go first? Don't all speak up at once. Okay, Jeff. Thanks for taking this one.
Guinea pig.
Okay. Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
I see you're over here doing this Christian stuff thing. You know, here's the thing, man. All religions lead to God.
So, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, all religions out there, I mean, aren't they all just saying the same thing? Just you can believe in whatever you want, and they all ultimately lead you to God.
So, but tell me, how did you come up with that conclusion?
Well, I mean, I feel like that should be the right direction to go. And I don't know, man. It just, I got that feeling that it's the right way. You know what I mean? Come on, man.
I understand that. That's your feeling, but do you have sources? Have you read? Where have you studied this for?
I don't know, man. I just feel like it's the right way to go, bro. That's the highlight of that, man. That's it. That was a good one right there.
Yeah.
Very well done, Jeff. But that is actually an answer I got. I actually had a person that came up and said all religions lead to God, and it was literally all about the feelings. You're going to come across that. My feelings determine reality. Now, where's the problem? I'm going to go on this one a little bit to help you guys out. What's the problem, do you think, about feelings determining your truth or reality? You know, that's another one they also have. Oh, thank you, sweetheart. Feelings can change. It's like this, I always take it from the same position as the Mormon. Mormons will say the same thing. You know, I got a feeling, I felt in my, burning in my bosom that Joseph Smith is a prophet. Okay, well, Cliff Kinnick brought up a good point. He says, sincerity in one's faith points nothing to its validity. Just because you feel something doesn't necessarily make it 100% real. We shouldn't be basing it off that. Christianity is not the same way. That's why we have to learn these things, but very good on that. All right. Here's a really tough one. Who wants to take number 2? If no one does, that's okay too. All right, let's try this one. So I'll read it. Oh, what's up? Oh, go for it. What's your name again? Sandra. Thank you so much. All right. You know, women should have their own free choice over abortion. It's their body, their choice.
Well, where do you come to the conclusion of your opinion?
Well, it's because I don't want to ruin my body and children will be a way of my life. Don't you understand that? I should be able to have domain over my body.
I really don't understand it. Can you give me some more information why this is your opinion?
That's actually very good. That's a very good one. I would also ask him, okay, well, how do you determine the value of human life? That's one I would also add on, because you had a good one, but I also tagged that on. How do you determine human value? Can you explain that to me? Why do you think a fetus is not a human life? Could you explain that more?
Right.
Dissecting their argument. That was very good, though. Very well done. Okay, here's a big one. You probably heard this one from Oprah Winfrey.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. Apart from handing everyone else a car on stage, and you get a car. This is my truth. How would you guys respond to that?
I'd ask them, do you mean your opinion?
That's actually true. I would ask him, that is a good point. I would actually start off maybe, and then I'm not saying that's a bad one. I would ask him, what do you mean by that? Because if they say truth, are we talking on the same definition? Is your definition of truth, well, my definition of truth is like objectively, because one of the main issues is not having the same definitions. So if I hear someone say like, Buddha is correct, what do you mean Buddha? Who is Buddha to you? Stuff like that. So that's a good one. Yes?
I don't get the whole, this is my truth, that's beyond my generation. But do they mean when people say, this is my truth, this is what I believe, or is this factual?
Oh.
When people say that.
Oh, because
Because that's, just because it's, this is gets me, is no one want to look at, because you can't argue with facts. A fact is a fact.
well, that's because nowadays it's not about the facts, like Ben Shapiro would point out. I like it in the Matrix, when I was watching the other night with my wife, the Matrix Resurrections, and we had the analyst who was talking to Neo, and he says, truth is such a fickle thing to mess with, it's very difficult to manipulate. But feelings, that's incredibly easy. So a lot of it comes down to how do you feel about it. That is your truth, that is reality. So when you're arguing it, it's more from an emotional perspective versus an intellectual
Right,
perspective.
truth is when they say it's my truth, that's how I feel. Is that what they're trying to say when they say that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, okay, so they're moving us. Okay.
So here's the next one, because thank you for that. That was a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. The Bible is a nice storybook, but it's not accurate. Ooh, that's a fun one.
Why
Show
would
me
you
an
say that?
inaccuracy. Where's an inaccuracy?
It's in there, dude. You're just not smart enough to look. Honestly, I'm not going to do your stupid research for you. So just go ahead and do your own research. You're just an idiot. I am not kidding you. That's how they'll come up. I am not kidding you. They will say that bluntly to your face. That's why I'm saying don't get discouraged now. I would turn around and be like, oh, what's up? Go ahead.
Well, what do you mean by that? Someone says that, what do you
No,
mean?
exactly. What do you mean by that? What do you mean that's a storybook? Can you explain that to me? What do you mean by it? Exactly.
You know, Nick, this is really sales 101. What you saying. I'm just saying,
No, that's
okay,
good.
this
It's
has been in
great,
sales.
yeah.
That's a sales call right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm peeling the onion of why they think that, and you're trying to get information.
Yeah. You turn it around. You keep turning it around on them to defend their point and the burden of proof.
And then
Yes.
you learn more.
So here's one I'd love to put out there. You are too judgmental. It's a statement. Okay. I usually don't ask questions too much on this, except for this is one I'll just share the one I usually use. When they say they're being judgmental. Okay. It's pretty isn't it judgmental of you? You're telling me it's wrong to judge, but here you are judging me, so what makes you more righteous than me to judge? Explain that one to me. Or you're just intolerant. Oh, okay. What do you mean by that? How am I being intolerant? When I was talking to the Mormon on there, he told me I was being too inhumane. Because I was questioning and pointing out the Book of Mormon's fallacies because he brought them up. And I said, well, I don't trust that Joseph Smith is a prophet. Here's the reasons why. And he said, you know, Nick, all these questions you're asking, you're just being too inhumane. Oh, I got him on recording too because I was doing my podcast. I said to him, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, you are. Oh, well, darn, that's how am I going to come back from that one? Oh, that's right. So I said, okay, so can you explain it to me before just saying it just is? Explain it to me. Come on, man. We're at ASU, you're at a university where you're a liberal arts major, you know, you have some intellectual powers behind you, so can you explain that to me? How am I being inhumane? Well, I don't know, but I mean, I can give, you should change things up. I said, well, how should I change things up? I put the fire back on him. It got super weird by then. A loving God wouldn't send people to hell.
Loving God, what?
A loving God wouldn't send people to hell.
You asked like, how do you feel God sends people to hell?
That's a good one right there. How do you feel about
I
it?
got this one from my brother, one of my brothers.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, yeah. If you guys have questions, like you've heard from your family members, let's throw it into the mix here too. I mean, we got paper here, but this is just kind of an ideas background we can go with. If you guys have ones, throw them up. Well, not throw them up, but you know what I mean. Yes, a loving God wouldn't send people to hell. I would ask him that question. Well, what do you mean by that? Like, how do you know? Like, what do you mean by this? Now, I've had this one brought up, and the first thing I usually ask him is, by what standards? Because when we look at a moral structure about how God is going to judge the heavens and the earth, I look and go, we have two structures here on earth which we look at. The first structure is human-based, which is about, I can look at a prison and go, hey, look, there's a murderer right there. They stole something, this person shot that person, oh, there's a pedophile right there molesting kids. I'm not that bad. I'm a pretty good person. But then when I'm confronted by God's 10 commandments and what Jesus did when he elevated the commandments, like, thou shalt not commit murder. Jesus says, if you've ever hated your brother, you've already committed murder in your heart. Here's one that really gets you on the men, and I'm guilty of it. You know, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look at a woman with lust, you commit adultery with her in your heart. Wow. Well, if I'm going to be judged by God, I've lied before in my life. I've used blasphemous terms before. I have done all sorts of bad things. So that's why I look and go, I would say ultimately, God doesn't send somebody hell because he stated in his word that he wants to have all of his goals that everyone may come to know him through Jesus Christ. That's why he sent his son. We purposely have to choose not to accept Jesus, which means that the ball's in our court now. It's not God who sends it. But God does have to have ultimate punishment against evil. That is true. I would say that is a just and loving God to do that. If my good deeds outweigh the bad, I'll probably go to heaven. Huh?
That one always comes up.
Oh, karma. I love that one. So yes, so they say my deeds will outweigh the bad deeds. Okay, so it's a matter of salvation they're asking. Right? That's ultimately what the question is leading towards. Is saying, my salvation in heaven is a merit-based system. So I'd be like, okay, so you think it's merit-based? Well, look at Ephesians chapter 8, verse 4 says, by grace you've been saved through faith. This is not of yourselves, lest any man shall boast. Right? It's a gift from God. So I told them, okay, you're holding on to this idea that if you do enough good works, you're going to get to heaven. All right. Well, what's the standard that you need to have to get into heaven? Right? If I'm going to do a quid pro quo here, I need to know the standard in order to like the paycheck, right? If I go to work, I have to do certain things at work to keep my job in order to have a paycheck. There's a standard. So what standard is needed? Is there a standard? And then on top of that, how close are you to the standard? Ultimately, your good works will never get you into heaven. Not whatsoever. In fact, God calls them menstrual rags, and I'm pretty sure you all understand that one pretty easily. That's what they all are. It's by Jesus Christ on his death and resurrection is the only thing that gets us in. Let's see.
Excuse me, I
Yes.
had a girlfriend who
Yes.
was about Catholic. And it was kind of her way or their way. And she told me, or she says, well, we believe in works that you have as a Catholic. And I asked her, I said, explain that to me. And then I said, show me in the Bible, if you will, where that says that. Good works. But she sent me something that didn't even make any sense. I don't know where there was no author of her verse, you know. And I don't know where she got that, because I tried to look it up in the Bible. And
It's because it's not there.
It's not there.
Because the Catholics, my wife is a former Catholic as well. My mother-in-law is a very devout Roman Catholic, so I have personal experience with what you're talking about. The reason is because they don't believe in the thing called sola scriptura, which the Protestant Reformation believes in, which is that the Bible is the full and authoritative Word of God. They believe the Bible plus different catechisms and different types of sacraments will get you into heaven. So you're going to hear something like, I've had this conversation about like Mary being the Queen of Heaven, for example, like what you were talking about on work base. They won't quote from the Bible because the Bible automatically condemns that idea. It says it does not work out. What they'll do is to say, well, St. Quintus Augustus and St. Luther or whatever they went from, they said this. But the problem is, it's not scripture. It's someone's opinion. And I brought it up one time with my mother-in-law. I love her to death, but I brought it up and said, what if the Catholic faith contradicts what the Bible teaches? What if you change your position to be with the Bible? And it's ultimately, well, no, because Peter started the Catholic Church. That's Jesus' church. I have to believe everything they say. There's a big problem. Yeah, that's why you'll never see anything really come from a Catholic that is actually like, I've had ones that explain from Mary, the Queen of Heaven, where they try to use verses that make no sense in context whatsoever to the backing of Mary being the Queen of Heaven. I get distracted
show me in the Bible, because I don't know where it is in the Bible, that says it.
It's interesting. I'm going to use you for a second, sweetheart, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when Felicia was Catholic, and we were dating originally, when we first started dating, and I wasn't a Catholic. What do you mean by that?
Yes. Good
Well.
job. Good job.
This is awkward. No, she went to Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and I started asking her questions about her faith, and about like, why do you believe this? Why do you think Mary's going to heaven? Why do you believe in all these sacraments? All of this. I remember one night we were in the car driving back from church, and we were having it was a late night service, and I'll never forget this. She's reading through her Bible. I'm driving the car, and she goes, "What? Honey, what does this mean? That Jesus is the only mediator between all mankind and God? What does this mean?" And I'm trying to drive the car and not have a freak out because we were all peaceful.
Yeah.
And there's now a person trying to keep straight on the road here, and there's a cop nearby. So, and I said to her, "Well, honey, it sounds like there's only one mediator between all mankind and God, Jesus Christ the man." And she was miffed the entire night. I thought she was mad at me. I really did. I was like, "Okay." I just go and do like a typical husband thing. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry." And then go hide in the closet or hide in the bedroom or go in the garage or whatever. Exactly. But no, she turned around and she said because she felt she had been lied to this entire time. She was finally going through the Bible and looking at the faith and seeing what this Catholic Church teaches. And then she finally realized that the Bible contradicts it. So she had an ultimate choice to make, which is, do I continue on my Catholic faith? Do I continue on my traditions? Do I continue on the thing that I grew up with? Or do I let that all go and follow Jesus? We didn't teach what the Catholic Church is teaching. Because it's interesting, because Jesus points this out. It says, what does it benefit a man in the world to lose their soul? Well, if you walk away from the Catholic Church where you grew up with, your family's involved, your cousins, everyone you knew was involved in the Catholic Church, but then you're going to lose your soul and not go to Jesus. Which one's more important? That's a really hard decision to make. And she ultimately made the decision to follow Jesus. And honestly, one of the things that got me into apologetics too was understanding why we believe something, but also to understand hostility comes from it, because her mother, my mother-in-law, I love her to death again, was extremely hostile. I'm still blamed for her turning to Jesus. I'm still the one blamed for everything that happened to her to walk her away. We've had countless Catholic books sent from my mother-in-law, to help us go back to the Catholic Church. When we were in Florida visiting family, she went off to the Catholic Church. I try not to bring anything up because I know this is an unwinnable battle at this point. I've handed it over to the Lord to take care of. I got another Christian pride, so to speak. And they came back from their, because they went to Catholic Mass. And we heard from her uncle, Doris, my mother-in-law, she believes that you're going to go to hell at this point because you're not part of the Catholic Church. How do you think that handled?
How do you think what?
How do you think that handled? Like when you hear from your own mother, you're going to hell because you don't believe the way I believe. And I tried to explain it to him, I tried doing all that, but she made an amazing transformation. She chose Christ over tradition, over her own family, because Christ was more important. It was all because we were going through these different questions and asking them and looking at the reasons and the rationale behind it. So we'll do a couple more, and then if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and ask. And you'll go for it, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry, one more thought. Where it talks about good works, I found it in Ephesians 2:10, where it says, "For we all are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." So it does talk about good work. I remember when, whose church did we go to in San Francisco? What's his name? Arson Sproul. We used to talk about good, there are good works, right? You know,
Right.
but the good works come after you've accepted Christ, and it's good works so that you're growing the body of Christ.
Right,
So-
you believe in Christ, therefore you're gonna behave that way he wants you to behave.
Right, yeah, but it's not the good works
But it's-
themselves that get you in. It's-
And that's something that
And by the way, I took a picture of that, we were somewhere and that verse came up. I took a picture of it, I'm gonna memorize it, not just to attack anybody with, or Catholics with, because I always tell them, we're all Christians.
Yeah.
You believe in Christ, we're all Christians. If you wanna pray or do your thing, go ahead, but to stop an argument. And I said,
Of course.
why should Christians fight each other over the way you pray and the way I pray? I'm just saying, this is what I believe, this is what's in the Bible. And I can't pick and choose what's in the Bible.
Correct.
What I like or what I don't. Either you believe it or you don't.
And I think that's the thing about it, when I was at ASU and I talked to Mormons, I even talked to Catholics who kind of set a table right next to us. I think that was the one that you really enjoy talking to the most. Is the whole merit-based system about trying to earn your way into heaven. If I do this, if I do this, if I do this, if I do this, if I do this. And it's really, when you're talking to someone like that, I find that it's more about, instead of trying to argue with them like, oh, it doesn't say the Bible, it'd be like, okay, but how do you know you're gonna get there? What's your guarantee of salvation? I've had Jehovah's Witnesses knock on my door and I said, I want to talk about salvation real quick. And they told me how we were supposed to acquire salvation, all these different works, so I asked them those appropriate questions of, well, what does that mean? How do you guys get there? And so I ultimately concluded and said, okay, well, why should I change my guarantee from John 3:16 about my eternal salvation with your uncertainty? Because if I said, if you drop dead right now of heart failure, God forbid that happens, you have no guarantee you're going to make it into heaven. Why would I want to change that deal? And so I always bring that up with Catholics and try to explain, and even to Mormons, that it is about, not that you are saved first, and when that transformation happens, you're not doing the works in order to get you into heaven, but it's a byproduct of being saved already. You have a question?
Charles Stanley's son, Andy, has a really good book before Andy went off the rails. And it's a, little 5x7 book, How Good is Good Enough. And it really, the whole objective is, well, is it 97%? Is it 98%? How good do you have to be to get into heaven? What if I don't reach that, quota? So it's a really good little book that explains it's not good works that it should happen.
Exactly.
You should be doing good works. And then I wonder with Catholics too, so I was raised Catholic, raised in high school. How many good works are they really doing? Is what I like to ask.
Well, then the answer as well is, okay, you did a good work. That's great. By the way, you looked at that girl, and she had a nice looking body. And I saw you scanning, and girls, I see you guys scanning as well, guys. Did you just commit lust? Ooh, okay. So, did that good work just get canceled out by your bad deed?
And do you have to go to confession for that? I wondered if that's what your wife got tripped up at. You don't need the priest to go to confession. We don't need that intermediary.
Well, you can really loan me, there's no good doctors.
No. As a kid, I used to get tripped up on that thinking, okay, I told him I lied 7 times, but was it really 8? And then was that a lie? So that's when I, as a kid, started questioning that. And then, I wanna say one more thing.
Yes.
And I'm sure everybody knows this, but when people say the Bible is a nice storybook book, but it's not accurate, God's not yet, I guess, made that real point that it's historical, and it's proven to be historical.
Well, that's
And that's how that gal got out of that lawsuit. She was talking to, kids, at recess or whatever about God, because they asked her, and then somebody checks their mom or dad saying, no, she's talking about Jesus in class, and then there was a big lawsuit trying to get her out. Pat Boone was there, and Lisa Gilmore was the teacher, and only because the attorney, had a light bulb moment thinking, oh, this is a historical book, she was teaching history, not anything else.
I've come across a lot of them where someone will say that it's just a storybook. I always ask them, okay, well, how do you come to that conclusion first and foremost? But then I've had atheists who said, well, I need evidence to believe in God, right? In the Bible. And most Christians I know would just be out there, would say something like, well, if historical this or this or this or this, and they'll throw a bunch of stuff out there. But I think the main point should be, work a lot, especially with dealing with students or whatnot. What you want to ask them instead is, okay, what evidence do you need? Right? What evidence do you need? There's plethoras and thousands of books out there. There's hundreds of hours of audio recordings. There's lectures beyond ridiculous that kind of make your eyes go cross-eyed. What evidence do you need for the Christian faith if you're open to it? And I remember one of the students last time I was there said, I don't know. Why God is omnipotent? He should know what I need. Now, most Christians, I got kind of hung up on this for a little bit until I thought about it and said, and something kind of came up into my mind. I'll share it with you guys. That is a sassy manipulator, a crass, evil manipulator. I said, I put it in this context. If I told my wife, Felicia, I love you, what would you say, honey? You're going to respond. I love
What do
you.
What do you
love me?
mean?
I don't believe you until you come up here and have sex with me. Right?
I don't know about
what
that.
am I being to you? I'm being
Yeah,
crass manipulator.
manipulator.
She's communicating to me her love in the way that she feels is best right now. And I am trying to manipulate her rather wrongly to do something that she's not comfortable with and is not okay with doing. I am a crass, evil manipulator. So when they have them go, God knows what I need, just God, show it to me. I turn around and go, well, I'm being real with you right now, and I can see you're just being a manipulator. So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate the conversation. Have a nice day. That's what I do to them. I don't carry the conversation on. I'm not going to fall into the fool's folly. I'm not going to sit there and play games with them. If they want to be serious, they're going to be serious. But I treat you going, you're insulting my Lord and Savior, the one I adore, by being a manipulator and being a sassy person about it. We're not going to play this game. You're going to go off in your corner and be a mocker all day. That's fine. God will deal with the mockers. That's what he said. He will deal with them in turn. It's not my job to do that. If someone comes up and says that they are interested in really having a good conversation, that's fine. But I end it. Or if they're in the middle and they're just mocking or they're cutting you off, thank you. Have a nice day. Appreciate your conversation. That's all you do. I think that's a big one too, is don't get into big arguments when they start doing that stuff. Because go take the bait. Because I look at it and go, when they do something like that, I understand when they say something of the nature of, I don't know really what kind of evidence I need, I'm still looking, I'm still pondering, that's fine, I'm totally cool with that. I go, hey, look, that's cool. Do you mind if I give you some stuff that might help you on that journey? Sure, you hand them a pamphlet, go ahead, here, take a look at this. Maybe it might stir something up, maybe you have a question about it, maybe you have a question about something else. We'll meet up later on. It's perfectly okay. When it's, like I said, God, he knows what to show me, he won't show it to me. I watch a tone. I would watch your mocking tone right now before he decides to do something to you. Because he has done it more than one time to plenty of leaders and other people. God will not be mocked. Because I get frustrated over that. That's where I kind of come back and go, I'm not going to get frustrated. And also some people don't get frustrated in the situation. Yes?
You know, another person who does this very well, like you, is Charlie Kirk.
Yes!
He'll sit at the university. What's interesting is word's getting out of these campuses, and there's more and more students going to him, siding with him. Because they will come up to him. Well, you know, they'll come up to him and they'll call him a name, and then they'll say something, and then he'll start questioning them. And then they just eventually stand there and they're like, they don't have anything to say, because they can't explain themselves.
I think when I had an engagement with something like with Charlie, we saw Charlie at ASU last time I was there. As I was there, we saw a bunch of communists coming onto there, and they had communist shirts on, or the Communist Party of America in Arizona. And we've had some conversation with the communists, and they always try to make God communist. Communism is what God wants. And I'm really actually coming to that conclusion. Okay. But they went over there, and I saw them pulling out these, not swastikas. No, we don't have the Nazis there. No, that would be ASU campus kicking them off. No, they came in and started wearing like burgers or whatever on their head, and they started screaming, "Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine, and they were chanting this. We're not just the Jewish people. And I usually carry some kind of protection on me just in case something goes really south or whatnot, and they decide to get really aggressive. I won't say what it is just in case. Anyways, that's up for your interpretation. But no, so I was with James. He's the one who does Rapture Christianity. That's where I go out. And I said to him, hey, these people are going around. It wasn't a big crowd, and you could tell a lot of them were just paid protesters showing up, like we Charlie would see. And they're coming out screaming, F the fascists! These are neo-Nazis! Free Palestine! Liberation! Communism! All this. So we're like, I'm going, ooh, okay. They start going around, whatnot, camp security, camp security following them around. And finally, they start coming back. I turned to James, I go, hey, dude, let's do a little thing. I'm not going to preach to them about Jesus or anything this time. I just want to see if they're willing to come and talk, and we can just ask questions about what they believe in. My mics are dying on me over our campus. I have to turn them off because we're picking up anything. I said, let me just talk to them really fast. And I had 4 pro-Palestinian, communist, fascists come and speak to us. Come and talk. Now, I first asked him, I said, I saw you guys with the pro-Palestinians. Can you explain to me why on earth, what does pro-Palestine mean? What does it mean to be river from the sea, Palestine? And their answer was, I don't really know, man. I go, okay. Do you know why you're here? Yeah, they paid me to come here. Yeah. Oh, you're paid. Well, who pays you? Some guy named Soros.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was like, do you mean George Soros? Yeah. And the AOC and all of them. We were in Tucson with them. We were paid to go over there, and then we came up here. So then, I talked to a diehard communist who was over there. Again, Colombo questions being applied. And what they came out to was, they didn't believe in the Palestinian movement, this Free Palestine movement. What they were trying to do, and they brought into the Christian circle as well, is we're trying to, and this is what they were saying, we are trying to destroy Western civilization and turn God into a communist. Turn God. I know, the audacity. So I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, yes, God is a communist. We hate America. American values need to die. We need to bring communism. Don't you guys know that Jesus was a communist? He hated rich people. Okay, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, you just read the Bible. It's right there. Oh, okay. Okay, can you point that out in the scripture? I don't have time. Oh, okay. That's fine. Thank you for your conversation. I appreciate it because they get all flustered. They're like, oh, what can I say? Thank you so much. Brainwashing. Oh, boy. But yes, it's all about the emotional stuff. That they come out like with Charlie Kirk, and they'll just scream like, if you don't agree with it, you're a fascist. You're a Nazi. They tried to shame it.
Right.
Christianity, God is really communist. And unless you agree with us, then you're a far right-wing Christian extremist nationalist who needs to be silenced.
Yeah.
Not kidding you. Code key slogans when you hear him talk. So anyways,
Well, I was in San Francisco in the late 80s. That's where I lived, south of San Francisco. And I was up there. I didn't even know this was going on Market Street. It was all pro-Hamas, okay? And I'm down there, and I could not believe my eyes, all the hate. So I said to this woman, I said, we don't hate in this country. We love the Jews, we get along, and you guys are here. And I said, get out of my country. We have nothing in common. We're a Christian nation. Well, not by the Constitution, but overall, we were founded on Judeo-Christian values. Anyway, I had a cop, and he literally picked me up on the sidewalk, and he said, you better get out of here, or you're gonna get hurt. But it's just, when you bring I'm getting way off, but I was gonna say, when you bring other religions here in the country, because we are definitely a Christian nation. I mean, that's, the 10 Commandments, those are all our laws, thou shalt not kill, blah, blah, blah. And you see this going on, I mean, these are great questions to ask. You know, why why are you here, and why do you hate God, and blah, blah, blah.
I think it's a good point. I think the main point to drag away from this, especially with this class, is when you come across these people like this, from people who are just like family members having a hard time, or not understanding, or they have their positions to the extreme of like political ends, like the pro-Hamas people, is asking these probing questions of like, what do you mean by that, to at least understand, in order to be able to reach out to them and be able to reach them on that fundamental, from the extreme of saying that God doesn't exist, I'm an anti-theist, the one who's just brainwashed and just feels like, well, I've been taught a lie. The whole premise is to reach out and be able to say, okay, question, why do you believe what you believe in? Why is it that you're all in this position? Why is it that it's there? Have you ever considered Jesus? So that's, in essence, that's why these Columbo questions, going to your position on the extreme edge, is a good position to have, is why do these Hamas believers believe in this? Do they understand the history? Can you question them? And if you're not going to talk about Christ, but at least you can understand their position on it.
Right.
I believe you had a question, sir.
Yes, there is quite a discussion in the country today about what is a man and what is a woman. If you were to ask me, I would say that a man is a human being that was conceived and born of male and subsequently matured and grew up. And a female, or a woman, is a human being that was conceived and born a female that subsequently was born and grew up. And if I were Marcia Blackburn, that's how I would have started that question to the lady who now sits on the Supreme Court who couldn't answer the question of what is a woman. Then I would have said to her, that's my understanding of what is a man and woman. Do you agree with that? Or if not, what is your understanding of what is a man and what is a woman? That's the way I would have presented that question if I were Marcia Blackburn.
That's a good point. I think a lot of, when it comes down to questioning people who are trans in the areas of transgenderism, I haven't really had too many experiences with them. The reason being is because once they see I'm a Christian, they know I represent, they usually try to shy away. But when it comes down to probing questions, it really comes down to, from what I've seen with like Charlie Kirk and others who've had these conversations, is it's more or less, I feel a certain way, I was abused by something, I've had some kind of abuse going on that causes this. Or I put it out there, and I got a lot of hate for it. I was saying this, I said, it's also a trend. It's trendy.
It
You're
is.
on social media.
It's popular.
It's popular to get your body parts amputated, to take wrong hormones, and to chemically and physically castrate yourself. It's cool. And I bring up, I go, so is chewing on Tide Pods apparently.
Yeah.
So it's what I can see, and I believe it's more on the supernatural end where we have a demonic presence going on that says that is trying to confuse and twist God's good creation in that way. But I always try to, again, going back to the Columbo questions, is I'm trying to just make you think, even for a second, why do you think the way you're thinking? What is the position? Why do you hold this truth so down? Why is it that your pronouns define who you are? Can you explain this out? Can we take a step back and take a third person perspective and say, why do you think this? How come?
Do you think most of those people have been abused?
I think I'm still looking into it, but I believe there is a healthy dosage of they've been abused. I think it's a mixture of the trending, abuse. I would love to sit down and have a full conversation with a transgender and have that, but that's a little more tricky than I would think. But yes, I think.
Nephew.
Oh, your nephew? I would ask him the Columbo questions like we're talking about here, and I would simply state, the question of, what is this transgender thing? Why do you hold this position? Why are you, why do you think you're transgender? Why do you think you're having, what's going on? I would make probing questions like that. And not because it's not hostile to ask someone that question. They may take it kind of like weirdly, but if you show a genuine thing of like being calm, being collected, just be like, hey, why, your nephew, why do you think you're a girl? Could you explain that to me? Something as simple as that they're like, they start going off the deep end. That's fine, let them go off the deep end, please. The more information you're gathering about what it is, take mental notes or later on write it down and then kind of go through, okay, here's why they think the way they think. And then we can probably do another stand of reason where we talk about transgenderism, looking for more ways to introduce them to non-gender confusing topics and bring them to like, once they understand why they think the way they think, it may go, I'm confused. So let's see here, it's about 11:20. So, really fast, do we have any other questions while we wrap this up?
It's been very interesting.
Very good, thank you. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, just more of a statement. I really like this because I think for every Christian, right, on the globe, we should be doing a better job of holding our faith and bringing people to Christ, being gardeners. I've never heard it that way, right? The harvester versus the gardener. And I consider myself, I guess now after this, more of a gardener.
Yeah.
Right? So, and unlike you or Charlie Kirk, we're not necessarily going to be interfacing with people that are agitators. Because once you get down to the ASU a lot, like that community, they're agitators, right? But we're going to be dealing with people in our sphere of life, me in the business world, right? That I think I can have a big, and I know I have an influence on, but I think I can have an even bigger influence on to have these conversations when they're kind of curious. And so they're not going to be agitators, right, and agitated towards me. So I think this is a program where a lot of us can use that to become
I'm glad to hear that, because that was my feeling when I watched this. I just watched some of the videos before Nick. But I like the approach. It's simple, it makes sense, and anybody can do it.
That was good, oh, go ahead.
I think what's been valuable to me this morning are your first two things. Who are you talking to? And what is your relationship to that person? As I go down this list you gave us, abortion is a woman's deeply personal decision. Well, if the lady you're talking to just had an abortion, marriage is a social construct. Well, what happened? Maybe she just had a divorce.
I actually had that one. Yeah.
One of them, where God, when my daughter died, maybe her husband just died, or her daughter just died. You gotta know.
And
That's what I got from me.
Right, and
This morning,
sometimes.
you have to know who you're talking to.
I think really, I think you hit on a real good point, Jeff. We are not at ASU and not into this kind of environment.
Right.
But we are around our friends all the time. We are around people that we don't believe are Christians. We have a way to ask questions as friends. We want to help them. And so I think the idea is to do it. We're not trying to be confrontational. We want to present it in a way that it's logical, it's true. And this is, to me, is encouraging for me, because I know for a long time I had a friend that he was really good at he had 8 or 10 young men that he was always discipling all the time. I used to think, why can't I not do that? Finally the Lord said, that's not your gift. It's kind of like this. You know, I think more of us, we need to be governors and not worry about trying to bring them to Christ. Let Christ do that. Let's do our part. And we may be the person, depending on how close you are, what kind of relationship you develop with them. But it's not the end game, because we gotta get them around to look at things truthfully. And if we can get them to do that, we've gone a long ways in the right direction. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
So Lisa introduced us to Greg Kugel in a Bible study. So we took the tactical course for 6 weeks or so. It was very good. And we need to do that again. But, and then we had the interactive role play throughout it.
Exactly.
It was very good.
I think it is, time for us to bring it to a close
Yes.
today. I think the point was to get more people exposed to this concept and this idea. I want you to think about it, and I want you to provide information back either to Lisa or myself, either one of us, so we can kind of decide where do we go from here. And that's what I'm really interested in. How can we take this, and how can we, and maybe we need more training. I mean, a lot of us just experience going through the process of asking the question and being forced to answer the question ourselves.
Yeah.
That really is what we need, is so we know how to respond to that. You go, what are we gonna do?
It really is like sales. You go into a company and you ask them questions, so you can establish their needs, if there's a fit with your product or solutions
Yeah.
of the company.
It really is true that, yeah, Kim.
We have a homeless ministry within our church that's very active, and so our relationships out there are, we're trying to build them each time we go out and go but we always approach them, with love and no judgment. I mean, that's first and foremost, we want them to see God's love. We hand out food, but it's a prayer ministry, we want to earn an opportunity to pray. It's all about love, and showing God's love, first and foremost, and when you walk away, that's what you want to leave them with, is that they just saw Jesus, they saw love.
I think that's really, really important for people who are really hurting. And we've got to be sensitive to that and look at it from that point of view. Because we will have people we run into that are sensitive. What they need is just somebody to come around them and say, be with me, guide me, pray with me, love me. And we need to be able to do that first. That's the most important thing that person needs right then. So I think what you guys are doing is amazing. It's so amazing our church is really involved feeding people.
Very much so, but it still applies, the same principles that you taught today, showed us today, as well as the love.
Oh, yeah,
It's
this is
inside the four
very
walls.
universal for everyone in every kind of ministry. You just broken questions into it. So yeah, it's for every single ministry.